Abraham doesn't do it perfect, his decisions kind of land him in these spots where it makes it abundantly clear that God's covenant is going to come only through Abraham,
right?
Not just not just to Abraham's family, more broadly. And so that's kind of where we find ourselves every step of the way. I think there's 5 instances leading up to Genesis chapter 21, which we talked about in our sermon this week. There's 5 or so instances where God makes this promise: I'm going to give you a son. I'm going to give you offspring. I'm going to give you a son. And so by the time we get to Genesis 21, man, this is the moment that God's going to deliver on his promise.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something really, really beautiful. It's something really, really powerful. And so, yeah, that's where we're at now. Man, I just want to read that passage in Genesis 21. It's just 7 verses, and this was what we talked about on Sunday. The Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did to Sarah as he had promised. And Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the time of which God had spoken to him. Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore him, Isaac, which there's a little footnote there. It says, means he laughs. And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. And Sarah said, God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh over me. And she said, who would have said that Abraham and Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. So we get this like celebration of this moment when God really delivers on his promise in a really, really big way. To this point, it was like, man, just trust me. Just trust me. I know it seems impossible. You're old, she's barren, all this kind of stuff. And they actually laugh at the prospect that they could have kids. And this is whenever God says, you're actually going to name your kid Laughter.
Yeah. It's
the irony almost.
Well, it's it's that moment when she finds out she doesn't believe. It's that laughter of derision. And now it's like a laughter of joy that like God has taken her shame away and turned it into something good.
Yeah, for sure. What were maybe some things as we kind of unpacked it on Sunday that jump out, and maybe some things about Abraham and Sarah, or even just God and who he is and his character, just from Sunday.
Man, so like we don't like to wait, like we like the immediate gratification. And like if I go by a restaurant and they got a long line, I pass it by. I will literally, I've done this within the last few weeks. I was at one restaurant that had a long line. So I drove to the other side of town to the same restaurant to get my food faster. Was it probably the same time or longer? Yes.
Yeah, it took just as long to drive there and drive back home as it would if you were just waiting.
But I did not have to wait, right?
Yeah.
Like when you wait, you have to, you don't have any control.
Right.
And it's that place of complete faith.
Yeah.
And complete trust in who God is.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, like, he comes, he doesn't, somebody's once said, he's never, he's never late.
Mm-hmm.
He don't come before time, right? He comes when he wants to come.
That's right. Yeah.
Like he's always on time.
Well, and it says there, right? Like, in verse 2, Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age at the time of which God had spoken to him. One of the other translations, I don't know what yours says.
Mine says at the appointed time.
At the appointed time, right? Like God had already planned on his timing.
Yeah, he already knew.
He already knew. And he's going to deliver on his promises exactly whenever he intends to. And actually, God comes to Abraham before the whole Sodom and Gomorrah situation, and he goes, actually, I'll return to you this time next year.
Yeah.
And so he was 99 at that time, and he actually, it says at the time he had spoken to him, Like he invited Abraham into that, but it was on God's time frame, not on
Right.
Abraham's. So yeah, I mean that's powerful.
And the question of do we, do we have faith in God in the time of waiting?
Yeah.
You know, um, that God is not silent. He's not forsaking his promises. He's good. Um, we just have to ask for faith that we will um, believe and trust and do that.
Yeah.
And there's also a verse in Romans. I think Paul Tripp talks about this, but uh, most people, the longer they have to wait, the less their faith grows.
Mm.
But it talks about kind of like Abraham's faith growing over time. I don't know the verse number. Do you know it?
No.
That was a joke.
There's one of the guys in the church is like always making fun of me for not knowing references. He's like, "You're a pastor. Like, how come you don't know these verses?" And I'm like, "Dude, I don't know."
Yeah. So, but anyways, it's most people's faith when something, it's the expectation that it's not going to come to pass when it's
Right.
longer. But his faith grew over time.
Could be
Yeah.
Hebrews 11 or something.
I don't know what it is. I think it's Romans. But
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah, man. Like, I think that's helpful for us too. Maybe some people might interpret that in some ways as being tied to like especially I'll put it out like this in our context, in an urban context. Like we're doing ministry in the hood, and it's what it is, and like there's a lot of low income, families here, and not I'm not saying that like I'm a high income family, okay? Like this is, but it's just a reality. Like there's not as much money and resources in our communities as maybe some others.
Definitely not.
And I think one thing that happens is that whenever people tie a faith in God to their circumstances in our kind of context, a lot of times it looks like, man, your blessing's coming, like your come up is coming, like just wait, and it's gonna come. And so I think maybe there's a piece to that that's instructive for us. In that, like, man, patience is good, and it is good to wait on the Lord. But those things do need to be tied into what it is that God promises, right? Specifically, what it is that God promises. And I think for us on this side of like the cross, what's beautiful about the gospel, right, is you kind of know where I'm going with this. Like, the beautiful piece of the gospel is that it's good news that carries with it good hope. Not just good hope that things will one day get better, but it's actually good news that what we're waiting for the most has already come.
Yeah.
In who Jesus is. And so Genesis 21 is a picture of that what you're waiting for most is a son.
Yeah.
To come signify God delivering on his promises.
Yeah.
And the gospel is like, man, what we're waiting for most is a son. That is a sign that God has delivered on his promises. And man, ultimately that comes in the person of Jesus, God's own son. And so, that's one of the connections I really wanted to draw out, and why I called this sermon, the long awaited son. So.
Yeah. It's the reality of who Jesus is. Like, we know we learn who he is, and all these things, all these things that he's done, and how he's died on the cross. But like the reality of like the future that is coming, even for us, is like far better.
Yeah.
Than what. And then there's the other side of that too. That like, I think the Bible's very clear. Like we have this idea that like having material success in life, maybe like having cars, having monies, all those things, is like the sense of of being blessed. And the Bible is very clear. I'm like, no, that's not it.
Right.
And like, I mean, J. Cole, he says there's beauty in the struggle. What is it? I got the long line wrong. What is it? There's beauty in the struggle and ugliness in success.
Mm.
And so, like, I mean, if you look at somebody like, I mean, there's just all these examples in the Bible of like Job has a horrible life.
Yeah.
But it's God is there with him.
Yeah.
In that, and like he loses all those things, and so not having, like the blessing ain't money.
Right. Well, and even like
the blessing ain't having everybody like you.
Right.
The blessing is that God is with you even when you're without.
That's right.
When you're in the struggle.
That's right. And even when
if
you make a mess of it yourself, like, because
right.
even in Abraham's story, Abraham at this point, he ain't poor though. Like, he's rich.
Right.
And what's crazy is that
Very
for
clearly.
all of God's promise that he'll bless those who bless him and curse those who curse him, like, and that he'll give him offspring and land and all that, Abraham in Egypt and in Gerar kind of accidentally becomes rich.
Right.
Like, and it's actually not by anything that he's like sort of done right, but it's God's favor that he shows towards him, and the riches that come out of that are never the point of the story.
Yes.
In fact, the riches actually cause problems, like coming out of Egypt, where Abraham and Lot look at each other and they go, we have too much stinking stuff, and it's starting to cause problems for us. And the riches actually drive Lot to Sodom, which ends up being where God destroys. And so, like, man, if you're gonna come away from the Abraham story and go, man, I just got to believe enough that God's gonna make me rich, like, and man, I'm telling you, in our context, that's the extent of most people, like, not most people, that's the extent of a lot of people's belief in God.
Right. Like, if you believe God's going to give you a blessing, like he's going to give you money.
Yeah.
Like, that's not.
Yeah. And it's like, dude, if that's the case, I'm telling you, you don't want it. What you want most really is a relationship with the God who has all of the world in his hands.
So, I mean, yeah, so like following Jesus now means losing in the short term to gain in the long run.
Yeah.
Like, you're going to lose out in this life.
Right.
You may not be happy, right?
Right.
I mean, you can be happy but not have like what you want, but
Right.
like the eternal joy of knowing God forever.
That's right.
And being with the Son, that's the blessing.
Right. Well, okay, so like,
and if you value that more than money, you ain't got it.
yeah. Well, and this is where, and we can kind of like, this would be some of the last things that we can say on this. Like, when you look at a human kind of fumbling through living out a covenant with God, you get a picture of somebody like Abraham, and he makes a lot of mistakes. And if you weigh his life in the balance, honestly, there's probably more bad things than he does as good. But God's covenant supersedes it all.
And that's good to say on that, because it's the, there's people within our context that think you gotta like follow the law.
Right.
You can't do that.
Yeah. The law shows you where you fail at it.
Like, you can't
that's
do that.
its function. And so, but then the second piece to that is, so if you see that's how humans try to live in light of the covenant and we just kind of stink at it. If you see how God lives in light of the covenant in the person of Jesus, in the flesh, as a human, what does it look like? Does it look like wealth?
No.
No, dude, the Son of Man had nowhere to lay his head. Like, he was homeless and humble, didn't have a lot.
Killed on the cross.
Killed on the cross. But he didn't need a lot.
Yeah.
Like that's the thing, is he didn't need a lot to live in perfect line with the Father's plan and the Father's covenant. And that should be instructive for us to be able to say, hey, like I don't need a lot in this life. I just need a faith that believes in what God is doing in this world and in my life. And that it's really all about him.
Yeah.
And I think, man, that's instructive for us to, like, this is what we should always do in these stories. Like, we're swimming in Genesis, we're swimming in the Old Testament a little bit, but we should always draw a connection to who Jesus is.
Yeah.
And what it is that he accomplishes. And absolutely, and this is why I called it, like, the joy of a long-awaited son. That's why I called that sermon that, is I think the birth of Isaac absolutely points to the birth of Jesus. And it shows us, like, we should celebrate in the reality that God really delivers on his promises. And when he does, man, like, that should fire us up. And
one of the things I thought about when you were talking about just how long it was going to be till you reach Jesus, right? Like, you go through, like, these life-wrenching situations with Abraham and his family and all that, and I looked and I was like, my Bible says page 14.
Yeah. Like, that's what let's see if I can pull it up. What I have on,
like
here.
You know, like how
we're in chapter 21, and I think there was where's it at? I don't know in my notes, but I think there was like 980 or something like that chapters until the New Testament when Jesus comes. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of things that happen there, a lot of thousands of years, a lot of characters, a lot of things. And so Jesus really is a long-awaited son. I mean, you know, from age 75 to, you know, age 100 when Isaac was born, Abraham waited 25 years. That feels like a long time.
Yeah.
You're talking about thousands of years before the serpent head crusher comes in Jesus. And, man, it should show us. And I think, you know, I don't know if this is a perfect way to understand the Bible, the story of the Bible, but I do think that the joy of God having delivered on a promise is proportional to the waiting on that moment.
Yeah.
Right? To the length of time that you're waiting. And so the 25-year span, how excited Sarah and Abraham are to meet their son, like, we should be thousands of years worth of excited that Jesus has come. Right. And man, like, that should be like a whole different category of joy than even Abraham and Sarah have there. So, yeah, man. Man, that's good. I think that's good stuff. I love doing this. I love unpacking the scriptures, and I think we hit on some themes for sure that I didn't get to on Sunday. And so hopefully we can kind of keep these going. Hopefully, you know, we don't have to do a whole Genesis recap next time. We can just really get into the text and then hopefully equip kind of our people to be able to live these things out, man. And so we'll meet up with you guys hopefully next week, and